All right, well, good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. It's a little bit after 10 o'clock, and we want to go ahead and get started. So I won't scare you with telling you how many slides we have to get through, but it's a big number, but it'll be fun and we'll go fast. Well, good morning. My name is Pete Westerholm. I'm the Director of External Affairs and Partnerships at GNRC. We are here at our Environmental Roundtable. I want to do a quick walkthrough of our agenda this morning. We'll be doing welcome and introductions in just a moment. Well, this is the welcome. We'll do introductions in just a second. We typically have a peer exchange at our roundtables. We'll then go over an overview of the roundtable. We have a couple of you who may be here for the first time. So we'll give you an explanation of what the purpose of the roundtable is and the role that it serves. We'll be going over our regional transportation plan. Then we have the around the table. This is the portion where everyone has an opportunity to share what you're working on, what you have questions about, anything of that sort. We'll be reviewing some upcoming activities that we want to get on everyone's radar. Then have another period of open discussion about any questions, issues, concerns that people may have, and then we'll adjourn. So with that, we'll go ahead and move into the introductions. So I said my name is Pete Westerholm, and I'll ask us to go to my right. So Skylar, you're up next. So please state your name and organization. You want to do a question? And so a fun question they were talking about was if you could be any animal in Middle Tennessee. Is that the question?
Yes, in our local
ecosystem. Which would you choose?
Okay. I'm Skylar Ellis. I'm an environmental planner at GNRC. I'm the one who's been emailing all of you. And if I could be an animal, I would be a river otter, which allegedly do live in Middle Tennessee because they always are having a ton of fun, and that's something to aspire to.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maddie Bowles. I'm also an environmental planner with GNRC, so nice to see everybody this morning. And if I could be an animal native to Middle Tennessee, I would pick a raccoon because I think there's an abundance of food to go around. I don't have to worry about security.
Hi, Andrew McIntyre. I'm a transportation planner here at GNRC. First animal that came to mind was a hawk. I don't know why, just gone with it.
I'm Connor Carroll. I'm a planning intern here at GNRC. And I don't know why, but I can't think of anything other than a donkey on somebody's farm. Somebody's cows. Yeah.
Taylor Lee. I'm a GNRC. I'm a transportation planner. I have to say, if I had to pick one animal, I didn't know they had farms for these, but we went to Chapel Hill last weekend and they saw llamas or someone's farm. So I'd be a llama.
Catherine Price. I'm with the Cumberland River Compact, and I'd be a great blue heron because they're cool.
My name is Kendra Middlebrook. I work for the Tennessee Department of Health, and I think I'd be a deer. I saw a presentation about some deer a couple of weeks ago. I thought it was cool.
They're graceful.
Yeah.
I'm Tara Pedraza. I'm with TDEC, the Department of Environment and Conservation, their Director of Stakeholder Engagement. And I would be a yellow-bellied sapsucker woodpecker because, you know, in the trees, like banging our head against the wall all the time in state government.
Hi, I'm Nikki Thompson. I am a grants contract administrator for TDEC Air Pollution Control. And the first animal that popped to mind was a deer. I don't know why. My husband hunts them. So it's weird. I don't know why I would be a deer, but that's what popped in my head.
Everyone, I'm Delaney King. I'm an associate attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center, and I don't know enough native species, but I'm going with mockingbird because I'm pretty sure it's the state bird, so I think we're safe there in terms of territory.
Sounds right. Andrew Orr, I'm with the city of Franklin. I work as the long-range planning supervisor, and I guess I'd be a little fox. Seem to have a lot of fun.
Reginald Archer, Tennessee State University. I have no idea. These animals are local. But I don't know. The way things are going nowadays, probably like the Tennessee crawfish, kind of endangered, should be protected, but yeah.
Everybody, I'm Nasir Bey. I'm with the Nature Conservancy in Tennessee, and I think I'm also going to pick a raccoon because I think with eating habits and activity, I'm not too far off. So it wouldn't be that different from my normal life.
I'm Maria. I'm with 10 Green Land Conservancy, and if I could be an animal, I would be a groundhog so that I could move in with the groundhogs that live in my house. And they're named Eugene and Victoria, and last spring they had 3 babies named Tic Tac and Toe.
Good morning. I'm Frank DeBose. I'm with Federal Highway Administration, working as an environmental protection specialist. So I think my choice would be a catfish if we could move the range over to West Tennessee and draw from there.
Max Baker, lead the research team here at GNRC. I would like to say I would be a wise old owl, but I don't think I could live up to the hype. So I will go with a blue tick coonhound. Go Vols.
What a hoot. I'm Michael Skipper, Executive Director at Greater Nashville Regional Council, and I'd be a house finch.
Daniel McDonald, I'm the Director of Transportation Infrastructure here at GNRC, and I've had a flock, or I don't know what they call it, parliament of owls, barred owls hanging out behind my house recently, so they've been on my mind.
That's the College of Owls.
Is it? I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Go back here real quick.
Do you want to say your animal?
Oh gosh. So I said this earlier, but to a few folks, so I'd picked a cicada because, which the reason is it's like, you know, you only got a little bit of time in your life. So you go all out, and it reminded me of the Bachelorettes. It's like you come to town, you're wild and crazy, and you leave a big mess. So that was my argument. All right.
Hi, I'm Rachel Salava. I serve as the outreach manager with our Aging and Disability Services. And I think I would echo river otter, but then I also thought about, like, is it the hellbender salamander? That's very special. So that sounds nice too.
Hi, I'm Mackenzie Healy. I'm one of the finance officers at GNRC. And if I chose one, it'd probably be an armadillo because I'm seeing them less dead on the side of the road. So I'm like, they look like they're surviving more in my mind.
And I'm Ashley Glasscock. I'm one of the research analysts. And I think if I had to be an animal, I'd be one of my own dogs. They seem like they're really well taken care of, and they just sunbathe. Like, I think I would like to be one of my own dogs.
All right, we've had one other person come in.
Hi, Jennifer Westerholm with Metro Nashville Government and Department of General Services, and we're picking an animal that we would like to be if we were not the human animal. I would probably choose a raccoon because I think they're beautiful and they're also really like smart and creative, and you know they do a lot with a little, like trash panda style. So raccoon.
All right. Well, I think that's everyone. We're going to move on to the next couple items on our agenda. As I mentioned, there is not a peer exchange, but I'll let Michael remind us about that and then start with the overview of the roundtable.
Well, good morning again. How many of you are joining their first environmental roundtable meeting? So a few new faces. Well, we don't have a peer exchange for you today, but I kept this in the agenda today just as a reminder that this is an opportunity. If you've got a really cool project that you want to share with your colleagues, peers across the region, just let us know before we get to that next meeting, which is going to be in May. We'll hand over all the presentation material to you and give you the floor for, about 25 minutes to share the work that you're doing. Doesn't have to be directly related to the things that GNRC is bringing to the table. I'll talk a little bit about the purpose of the roundtable, but it's as much about just an opportunity to convene, environmental specialists and people that really care about protecting environmental quality across Middle Tennessee and have chosen a profession that allows them to do that. So, I mean, from time to time, we'll have programming that we want to engage you with, but otherwise it's just probably don't have that many opportunities to get together with the folks in this room. So want to make sure you're taking advantage of that. Speaking of the roundtable itself, I've got a few slides here. I'm not going to go into detail here. There's a lot of good information about who GNRC is on our website. We put the slides in the packet for you just so that you can take them as a resource. So you are probably a better reader than I am, so I just wanted to hit some highlights here. But if you don't know, GNRC was created by the Tennessee General Assembly back in the 60s as one of 9 development districts across the state of Tennessee. And you see the map of those 9 districts. On the screen, we represent northern Middle Tennessee, and I'll talk a little bit about the implications of that Act. It was the Tennessee Development District Act of 1965, here in a minute. But again, we represent formally 13 counties across Middle Tennessee. There are 52 cities within those 13 counties and really support collaboration around a range of issues. From time to time, though, our geography will shift depending on the topic that we're engaged in. We want to make sure that our geography is aligned to the market for the issue. So for example, for transportation planning work that we do as the NPO for the Nashville metropolitan area, we Murray County as well to the south of Williamson there on the map. And then for like solid waste planning, we will look at the state planning board districts across the state and make sure we're pulling in the counties adjacent to us that are engaged in local planning with their neighbors on a particular issue. So it gets really confusing sometimes when we're varying our geography, but in the end, it's just important to know that we're interested in making sure that we're pulling together stakeholders from whatever geography makes the most sense for the region. And then, obviously we need to back into the statutory requirements for certain geographies in our formal role that we play. Couple of reasons that the state legislature created development districts. One, I think probably first and foremost on the minds of legislators at the time was to just make sure that communities across the state, particularly rural communities, had sufficient staffing capacity to be planning for their futures, to be thinking about economic development strategies to bring prosperity to their county. A lot of our communities across the state are pretty lean and thin in-house with respect to staffing for planning and economic and community development work. And so development districts were created to be an extension of local government staff. And we, to this day, do a lot of work on behalf of local governments that is just sort of one-offs that an individual community might need assistance with. The other reason why they created development districts was to respond to a series of federal acts that were being passed in Congress that required local communities across the nation within metropolitan areas to be part of the decision-making process that states were managing with respect to how federal funds were going to be used to invest in infrastructure and social services. And so the formation of NPOs dates back to the 60s. The Public Works Act of 65 created the U.S. Economic Development Agency and established the need for regional economic development districts. Also in 67, the Older Americans Act out of Congress established the need for area agencies on aging to convene local communities to prioritize federal funds to support older adults. And in Tennessee, we also include adults with disabilities into that work that we do. I'll talk a little bit about those designations in a minute. And then what's ended up evolving since the 60s is we're providing that technical assistance to local communities. We're meeting the federal requirements for convening partners to engage with state leadership on how to prioritize federal funds for infrastructure and social services. And so what ended up happening is we ended up sort of doing everything in between. So a lot of our work today is actually regional in nature, not required by the federal government, beyond the scope of an individual community, but it's just an issue that communities across Middle Tennessee want to work on together. And we tend to be the first place they go to collaborate with their peers across the region on a particular issue. One example of that would be solid waste. You all probably know that the landfills that we send the majority of our household garbage, our municipal solid waste to, are reaching the end of their useful life. And who's going to figure that out? And so the mayors have banded together to try to solve that problem through the resources of the Greater Nashville Regional Council, which are in part technical in nature, so analyzing the problem and evaluating potential solutions, but also in implementation. So it might be that we work to creating new institutional capacity for our region to be able to plan and finance and build and manage a regional solid waste system, or it could be where the mayors work together to engage with the General Assembly on policy reforms through legislation, or the governor's office or TDEC on that particular issue. So that's an example of nobody requires us to do that. We do have a formal role in solid waste, but it's mostly for reporting on diversion rates to track progress in the state plans implementation. But a lot of what we're doing in solid waste is just because the mayors needed an organization to convene them and provide them the assistance to figure out that problem. So I'll move on quickly to the state and federal designations we have. I've already referenced these, and I'm not going to go into detail, but pretty much what all of these designations are doing are recognizing the organization and its leadership as being the primary forum for cooperative decision-making around a particular issue. So we've got the AAAD, that's the Area Agency on Aging and Disability that I mentioned. And so the federal funds that flow through Congress, and then the state adds money to that. There's state legislature also funds older adult services. Basically, the feds and the state ask us to prioritize what issues we want to address with those funds, whether it be transportation services or nutrition, or in-home services, help people stay in their home as long as possible. So we prioritize the spending, and then in the role as a AAAD, we'll go out and procure the providers to provide those services to people. So like, for example, when it comes to transportation and nutrition, we rely on the Mid-Cumberland Human Resource Agency for the counties of our region outside of Nashville. And then for Davidson County, we rely on the Metro Social Services, which is an agency within metropolitan government. But we have a lot of for-profit and nonprofit providers too that are responsible to serve as a vendor to go in and help folks stay in their homes. And so we procure them, and then we monitor them to make sure they're doing good quality work and compliant with the regulations that govern the use of the funds, and so on and so forth. And Rachel, you just met, is the person who is sort of the face of what we do in serving older adults, and is always looking for opportunities to expand our program beyond those things that are funded by grants from the government, which are pretty minuscule in terms of what we actually need to address an aging population in our region and across the state and the nation. The Economic Development District, this is a designation from the Department of Commerce, U.S. Economic Development Administration. And essentially, they look to us to develop a regional economic development strategy. We don't author that strategy. We facilitate the development of that strategy, which is otherwise authored by economic development experts in the private sector. So what does industry want to pursue in terms of job creation? We try to align that with the vision that local communities have for growth. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is make sure the strategy is informing public sector investments in infrastructure. So if we're building roadway, water, sewer, other utility type capacity across our region for the purposes of job expansion that we're doing, we're putting that infrastructure in the places that, you know, those responsible for building the industry are interested in. So it's just making sure we have good alignment there. And when somebody applies for funding through the US EDA, they look to us to make sure that that application is consistent with the regional vision. It's a requirement of funding from the EDA, which segues into the NPO. Very similar process here. It's a little bit more detailed, prescribed, but the NPO designation means that we're pulling together local communities with regional and state transportation officials to cooperatively decide how we're going to use principally the formula funds that are distributed through the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration for roads and bridges and walking, biking, and transit infrastructure and other types of programs and services that help with mobility across the region. And so in that role, we develop a regional transportation plan, which is kind of the equivalent to that comprehensive economic development strategy I just mentioned. So it's our vision for how we're going to invest in improving transportation. And then it becomes basically the checkpoint for the use of funds from the federal government. So if we're going to deploy funds in the region from federal highway or FTA, it needs to be on a project identified in that plan or consistent with that plan. We're going to talk a little bit more about the RTP today. That's the programming that we're bringing to you today. We need your assistance to make sure we're doing a good job with transportation in a way that supports our environmental goals. And then the Certified Development Company, that's the CDC, that's a designation by the US SBA. We actually created a nonprofit in the 80s called the Mid-Cumberland Area Development Corporation that does small business lending through SBA programming. And we staff that, and we help facilitate that board of directors. But that's a federal designation that we also identify with. Okay, and then y'all probably know a lot of this, but we do all kinds of stuff. We do planning, we do economic development, technical assistance, we do grant writing. If a community gets a grant from a state or federal agency, we'll manage that project for them. We have social workers who help people get assessed for programming, and then we help get them onboarded into that programming and so on and so forth. If you're interested in more about what we do day to day throughout the year, our annual work program is on the website at gnrc.org/annual budget, as well as the past few years of work programs. And so this goes into a little bit more detail on the individual activities that we are scoped to do throughout, in this case, fiscal year 2025. Also, it shows you how we're funded, the streams of revenue that we get, and where our expenditures are. Fun fact, about 53% of our current year budget is passed through. So we are using that money for direct services to people or subgranting it out to local communities or nonprofits. About $25 million budget this year. And then we really do have an impact across the entire region. These are just a representation of all the touch points that we had in the fiscal year 2024 work that we did. I'm going to now segue into the organizational structure so that you understand where the environmental roundtable fits within everything that we just mentioned. So we have a regional council body that's an overarching governing body. It's made up of all the mayors across Middle Tennessee, city and municipal. And then each of the county mayors appoint somebody from their community to represent business and commerce, and somebody from their community to represent issues of social equity and inclusion. So 13 county mayors, 52 city mayors, 13 business reps, 13 social equity reps, and then 2 members of the Tennessee State Legislature serve on our overarching regional council, which meets every other month in even number of months. Yes, and we alternate. Odd number of months are our transportation policy board. But they are setting the overall vision for the organization and the work we do together as a region. The board of directors is the more operational aspect of the board. They met here yesterday. It's 13 members that represent each of the communities within each of the 13 counties that we serve. Help us with our budgeting and internal policies for HR stuff. Nobody's interested in that other than us. Really, though, I want to point out or emphasize really what's happening on the left and on the bottom. So on the left, you see these policy boards. Policy boards are boards that have independent decision-making authority from the regional council body itself. They're empowered through federal statutes or state statutes at the state level to make decisions independently of the full membership. And so a good example of that is a transportation policy board, which is making decisions about the use of federal funds across the NPO footprint. And then you can see in the light blue, we have a series of advisory committees that are part of the formal decision-making process for one of those boards, a policy board or overarching regional council body. Again, they're part of the conveyor belt of decision-making. But across the bottom, or the orange box is the roundtable network. So sometimes these roundtables introduce an item that go through a formal decision-making process, but otherwise it's just it's an informal brainstorming of experts around an issue. And so the things that come out of this roundtable may influence some of our programming and go through our committee structure to the boards. But otherwise, it might also just be influencing what TDEC is doing or what a nonprofit decides to focus on. So it's really about understanding the issues, convening experts around potential actions to address any concerns or challenges that we're facing within that issue area. And so the environmental roundtable is part of that. We have a solid waste directors roundtable and IT directors roundtable. The one that a lot of people are familiar with is our mayor's caucus. So we convene the mayors on the regional council in a more informal way for relationship building and just sort of setting an agenda for the things that we're going to be doing. And so they're part of that roundtable network as well. As far as this particular roundtable, you have in your slides, so you can study this after the meeting a little bit more, but this is the list of the roster, the makeup of the folks that are invited to participate in this group. We have federal agencies, state and local government agencies, and then nonprofits and academia engaged in issues around environmental quality. And at any time you think we're just missing somebody, or you've worked with a colleague that you think would be an awesome contributor to this group, feel free to bring them along. Let us know, and we will make sure they feel welcomed. In terms of the objectives for this particular roundtable, provide a venue for regional collaboration that cuts across sectors, environmental issues. I mentioned at the beginning here that despite our programming needs, it's really just an opportunity for you to get together with colleagues on a regular basis, and we'll just take care of the logistics, so nobody else has to deal with that, right? But we do want you to be plugged into formal policy making that we're managing across the region. So that's another one of those objectives. And then this next slide, just things that we're looking to influence. We're looking to influence policies as they are constructed by any level of government, just things that are going to ultimately improve environmental quality across Middle Tennessee, which sometimes is just doing the best we can to mitigate things that we don't control, right? So getting really close. I'm going to skip over that. I think that was just a duplicate. So that is a quick over of what, maybe that's a fact check. That probably wasn't that quick, but that's an overview of the roundtable and how it fits within GNRC. Are there any questions about any of that? Is that good information? Like not interested?
I have a question on the roster. Metro government looks like the only local government. So have a lot of the other local governments in the 13 counties kind of at times been invited or engaged, but maybe it's commute, it's hard to get. I don't know, like have they been brought to the conversation?
Yeah, from time to time, we do have participation from the planning directors, planning staff, from communities who sit on our transportation coordinating committee. And today we have Andrew here from Franklin. I think you're a pretty regular participant in this. And it's open to them, but we do talk about environmental issues with our group of planning directors also. So it's a good point. And particularly when it comes to making sure that we have good perspective on rural, exurban, suburban, urban issues, which are all different. Yeah, there's a lot of like common vision for environmental quality, but the circumstances are different, right? The solution set is sometimes different.
Trust the only one with a sustainability director in that program, right? My knowledge.
It's probably true. Does Franklin, do you have a designated person?
It's sort of dispersed among staff, like that responsibility. Our department's called Planning and Sustainability.
I'd say Franklin would probably be the other one if there was another.
I've been exploring that idea with Clarksville as well, trying to get them. We see it as a need.
Cool. All right. So this next section is a lot of information, right? So the intent isn't to go through each of these slides. They're printed out for you. And in the follow-up email that we send to you after this meeting, we're going to give you access to a list of all the data layers that we incorporate into our process, and then a map, to an interactive map where you can explore it. But we did want to do a few things with you today. We are kicking off a major update to our regional transportation plan. And I should mention, this group influences a lot that we're working on regionally. We did an open space and land conservation strategy a couple of years ago that this group was heavily involved with. It's an important topic for rapidly growing communities who are losing like agricultural land and open space. So you influence that. You influence a lot of the other work that we're doing, but the principal instigator for the creation of this from our perspective was to inform the regional transportation plan, because that's it's like what's the word I'm looking for? Cornerstone. It's the most visible policy making that we do as an organization. And as infrastructure goes, so goes a lot of other things, right? Related to growth and development. And transportation infrastructure is driving infrastructure decisions beyond roads and bridges. And so it's really the core product that we create where we needed your help the most. And if we have a really good transportation plan that understands environmental considerations, it'll influence other things that are happening across the region. So we are doing a major update. I want to give you a little bit of background about why we do an RTP, We have Federal Highway here to fact check me, so call me out if I get any of this wrong. I'm just kidding. They set sort of the parameters and the requirements, but they empower our region to approach it in the way that fits us, which is why NPOs exist. They're all unique. They're like snowflakes, similar composition, but different shapes and sizes all across the country. So our current plan that was adopted back in 2021 is available online at that link. And there's a couple of there's two versions of it. There's a longer technical document, but then there's about a 30-page, the one most people are interested in. That's the cover there that kind of flips through key metrics, what we're trying to accomplish as a region, and high-level overview of how we intend to program funds over the next 25 years to improve transportation. But it's a $10.5 billion plan. And so that's a fiscally constrained plan, meaning we forecast future revenues from federal sources and state and local matching funds. And so we have a balanced budget in this plan, $10.5 billion, assuming status quo on the policies that lead to funding. And then we basically allocate every single one of those dollars to a priority. It might be a specific improvement, like a widening or an intersection improvement or a new transit service or sidewalks, or it could be we're funding a program, like an ITS program or a sidewalk program, where there could be discretion in its deployment as time goes by. So it might not be specifically a project with Termini, it could be also a program. But that is available both in terms of the literature, but also in an interactive map. Its effective dates are 2021 upon adoption out to fiscal year 2045. Federal law requires us to look ahead 20 years into the future. We always take a quarter of a century bites at a time, or 25-year plans. My first plan, another fun fact, the first plan I worked on for the Nashville NPO was the 2025 plan, which seemed really far into the future. So I'm kind of old now, right? I haven't gone back to see how much of that plan was implemented. I'm kind of afraid to. And that's okay, because these plans have gotten better, and maybe some of those earlier plans it's good we didn't implement them. But it's a balanced budget. We have to address federal, like national objectives for transportation, which are much more than getting people from A to B, right? It's about supporting economic development, supporting environmental quality, social equity, even things like tourist development is identified in the national planning factors, things that we need to make sure that we're addressing with our transportation dollars. Because if we only think about how to get someone from A to B the fastest way possible, we're probably going to sacrifice a lot of the other things that we care about in the region. So we align with the national planning factors, and then we also set our own goals and objectives. They're often very much sort of inherently aligned with what the nation's trying to do. This is a look at the map of individual projects in the current plan. This is interactive on the website. We program funds in horizon, short, mid, long range horizon. And we also identify a lot of projects that we don't think we have the money for right now. All those unfunded needs are also really important to remember, because we are certainly underfunding transportation in Tennessee. I'll give you an example, that $10.5 billion cost of our current plan. So when you look at our region compared to Austin's 2-to-1 per capita investment over our plan. Atlanta is 3-to-1. Denver's 6-to-1. And a lot of what's missing is the discretionary funding from the feds that these regions are tapping into, in large part because they have a lot of skin in the game. So we're missing discretionary grants historically. And one of the reasons why we miss those is that we don't have a lot of dedicated funding for transportation, particularly on transit. So like the Denver region generates about $600 million a year just through their transit tax. Compare that with the $250 million a year that we have in this plan from federal, state, and local sources. So, I mean, that's a lot of what we've been working on recently, and the success of Nashville and the voter approval for the transit tax is part of our strategy to grow the base of local funding to better tap into discretionary grants that will help us build the large capital projects that we can't afford on our own. Tennessee's a pay-as-you-go state, so we have to wait till we save enough money to do this stuff, and we're never going to off record. We're never going to get there because inflation is going to keep those price tags slightly out of reach. So
Ask about the $1 billion announcement from the governor
Yeah,
then with the
that's-
state of the state. Is that like
awesome.
towards those sorts of projects, right? To leverage federal funding?
Yeah, I don't think we know exactly how that money is going to be divvied up, but like the Transportation Modernization Act that gave the $3 billion infusion a couple of years ago. Was that last year or 2 years ago now? That was $3 billion. Some of that was set aside for the development of the toll lanes, the choice lanes projects. And then some of that was carved out to be distributed to projects that TDOT, largely projects that TDOT would do, but $750 million per grand region of the state, 4 of those. This $1 billion, a lot of this recent infusion, it's to pay for those Improve Act projects that were identified in the statutes. Because if you were, I'm getting into the weeds now, but we raised the state gas tax a few years ago, and to get that done, TDOT identified specific projects in the bill as a way of like convincing legislators to vote for that tax. Well, the tax rate in that project list did not jive in terms of financial feasibility. And there's sort of a promise that if you give us the state money, we can knock this list out in the next 10, 15 years. Reality was it was only enough state money to do those projects in about 70 years. And so we're using a lot of our federal funds now to get those Improve Act projects implemented. And so these recent infusions are trying to get those out of the way so that we can start working on the stuff we know we need for the future. This is our timeline for updating the plan. I think the most important thing to know is that we're going to be sharing with you today our forecasts of future population growth and traffic impacts on traffic. Where this will matter to you, though, is that we need you to help us assess the environmental risks associated with our development patterns. And then in the end, to make sure that as we implement transportation improvements, that we're mitigating the environmental impact that those projects might have. That's what we'll get to with you over the next few months. The big phase we're in right now is in orange, where we've issued our call for projects to TDOT, transit agencies, and local communities. So they're submitting their project applications to us, and our job is to evaluate those projects for how well they will meet the needs that we've identified through the modeling, and to score them essentially based on how well they achieve our overarching goals and objectives for the use of federal funds. So that's what we're going to be doing through May, and that's the thing to really think about in terms of the schedule. So I'm going to get into the growth forecast now, and we really started high level. We started with the U.S., and I think the point here is that I really like the way we do our population and employment forecasts because we participate, we subscribe to data from Woods and Pool Economics, which is a company that forecasts population employment across the entire nation. And they do that in a very detailed way. So if you're used to pulling census data, which is now the long form is now principally through the American Community Survey, they produce their forecasts in a similar sort of granular way. So we can understand socioeconomics and demographics related to that forecast. So it's more than just the number of people or the number of jobs. And it's also controlled nationally. So what ends up happening if individual jurisdictions or states do their own forecasts, probably if you add all those up, it's going to be some crazy number above what is realistic for the country. So I like that nesting. What we do then is take those forecasts and predict where the people and jobs are going to land at the parcel level. That's where our sophistication comes in, is then allocating that forecast to the landscape. But I think the context is important. So again, you can study these. These are really fascinating to look at just in terms of national trends for growth, and it kind of tells part of the story of why we're growing so fast as well. But Tennessee is about 2% of the nation's population today. Will be 2% by the year 2050, even though Tennessee as a state is growing from about 7 million today to about 8.5 million by 2050. This is a map of county net population between those two time periods. So this is net. So this is absolute growth happening. You can see just the tremendous amount of growth that's happening in the western part of the U.S. and in the southeastern part of the U.S. And then dotted throughout are just the tremendous amounts of growth that are happening within the nation's metro areas, which is probably not surprising to you because there has been a huge shift from rural living to urban living over the last couple of decades, and that is just expected to continue. We also provided to you a map of the rate of change by county that you can look at if you're interested in. All right. The national growth rate is 19% over time. The Tennessee growth rate is 22%. What I want to do here as we get into the parcel-based forecasts is look at our region's growth in the statewide context. So the region that we represent is about 32% of the state's population. We're expected to be 37% of the population by 2050, and in large part because we're expected to see 2/3 of the state's growth. Middle Tennessee will see 2/3 of the state's growth between now and 2050, according to these forecasts. Williamson County and Rutherford County are both expected to leapfrog Hamilton County, which is where Chattanooga is, in the population rankings by 2050. Before then, but imagine when you look at the list of most populated counties in the state, you would see Williamson and Rutherford after Davidson ahead of Hamilton, future Hamilton, right? So that's pretty tremendous amount of growth happening within our region. Right, so we're expecting regional population exceeding 3 million, which is bigger than present day San Diego, MSA, Denver, Baltimore, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Austin, Kansas City. All those MSAs today are smaller than where we will be in the next couple of decades, which is an important comparison to make, just so you can visualize what the size of our region could look like in real terms. This is where land use modeling comes in. I just have a few more slides before I turn it over to Max to get into the environmental layers. But then we take those forecasts and then we predict where that growth is going to happen at the parcel level. And we have a model that's developed. It was initially out of academia, I believe, out of California, that we've been working with for about 5 or 6 years now. But it's looking at influences from the market, influences from public policy on where growth will go. So what's driving development from a market standpoint, what's driving development from a public policy standpoint. So it takes those things into consideration. So the public policy would be the local land use policy or the local zoning ordinances of individual communities. And the market would be more related to how the private sector is developing our communities today. So feed that into the models. This is looking at residential density across the region. It's the heat map here. You can study the legend later, but this is a look at the pattern in 2023 in terms of density. You can really see downtown Nashville there at the center of the map. You can see Clarksville up in the northwest part of the region. And a lot of our growth is in those 3 corridors, the southeast corridor to Murfreesboro, the south corridor through Franklin and into Murray County, and that northeast corridor up through Hendersonville and Gallatin. So that's today's density. And then when we forecast that out into the future, you see a lot of infill development that's expected to happen in those corridors, but you also see a lot of continued sprawling development out into rural areas as well, which can be a pretty big concern when it comes to trying to protect open space and the environmental quality of our area.
Well, I used to rank Davidson County as like the worst sprawl. Is it still?
It's one of the top. I remember like when I went to grad school, left Nashville in '98 to go to Austin, and USA. I remember like the day I left, like USA Today's cover was how Nashville was about to outpace Atlanta in terms of urban sprawl. And actually that article and that time period of our region's history is what led to a big convening by Vanderbilt and GNRC in the late 90s. We commissioned Neil Pierce, which is somebody who studies regional dynamics and growth, and really had a moment of awareness about our trends back in the late 90s. And that's what led to the creation of the Cumberland Region Tomorrow, the Civic Design Center, and some of these other nonprofit initiatives to try to make sure we're growing with quality. Okay, we also the forecast where jobs are going to be. And again, there's detail behind this information in terms of the type of jobs as well. But this is a look at the present day employment density across the region, what we're expecting out to 2050. In the end, we care about both residential population and jobs. And so we also then do a composite. So we're pulling people. So this is people, both people who live and people who work in these locations. This is 2023 density. This is 2050 density. You'll want to interact with these maps online, and they are available, and I'll give you the URL. We do have an ask for you of these forecasts I'll get to before we wrap up. So for the transportation plan, one of the main things we're trying to do with these forecasts is figure out how it's going to impact our transportation system. So this is a look at travel speeds on our area roadways today. Very similar to like the Google traffic symbology in terms of what is moving as expected versus what is moving slower than expected. But our average speed on the entire network is about 40 miles per hour today. We expect that based on these growth forecasts to reduce down to 37 miles per hour, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a pretty tremendous reduction when you start to look at individual facilities. And you can see the map here, all that dark red light up. And so this is assuming that we only finish the projects that are in our program now. So the short-term program where we've committed actual appropriated dollars. So we're going to finish those projects, but this is clearly showing that we need to do more into the future to improve transportation for people. That speeds, this is looking at overall like congestion that includes speeds plus volume to capacity, which is a traditional engineering measure. We've got 2,300 miles of congestion across the region today. We expect that to increase to 2,700 miles of congestion in the future. The severity of congestion is really important, but also the distribution, the spread of congestion is important because one of our congestion management strategies is alternative routes that are not congested. Well, those alternative routes that are not congested today likely become congested in the future. So you just lost that option. Right? So that gets us to assessing environmental risk with these growth forecasts and then ultimately your There's a lot of things that we can work on with you together as we go through this process. I'm not going to get into this today, but these are essentially the touch points that we'll have with you all as we go through the planning process for the transportation plan. And this is a slide that kind of describes some of the work that we did for the current plan in terms of assessing environmental quality. And then we're going to give you as a follow-up here a list of the data sets that we use to represent environmental features. And then for now, I'm going to turn over to Max. He's going to walk you through some of the more important environmental layers that go into our process to assess environmental risk. And then he's going to toggle it back over to me, and I'll kind of just bring us home in terms of what our asks are of you. Skylar, how are we doing on time? Am I way over?
Still,
Okay.
still 11:30.
Any questions about those forecasts? There's a lot of opportunity for you to dig into those and ask questions. But okay, Max.
All right, I'm going to go through a lot of maps, hopefully very quickly. If you have any questions, this can be interactive, so ask questions, point out errors, cheer for your favorite environmental layer, whatever you want to do. Just for context, Middle Tennessee area and the planning region that we're most concerned about with environmental planning. Base map imagery. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of delay on this. Generalized land use. So this is taking all of the parcel data from each of the individual counties' tax assessors and grouping the land use values into categories of development or non-development. One thing to point out, Peter actually picked this one out, but you can see an error at Shelby Bottoms right there in Nashville was incorrectly coded as industrial. And that's because their land or their tax assessor data calls it terminal distribution and warehousing. So probably once it went over to Metro property, the tax assessor was no longer concerned about it. And that is there. So those are the types of things. If you find something in any of these maps, do circle it, point it out to us, and we can go in and correct it. For land use information, this is using a lot of satellite imagery. So there's several different systems that do that using land cover monitoring system and national land cover data sets. Those are two of the big remote sensing operations. They come from different satellites that go around and take pictures, and then people classify land use or land coverage based off of what they're trying to ascertain. So land cover change monitoring system, this is a new one to us. It came from the U.S. Forestry Service. They're particularly concerned with wildfires, so they do a really good job of understanding where urban areas might be in threat of wildfire. So this is their land use. They do identify agriculture and rangeland. That is something that was brought to our attention through doing some of our comprehensive planning work as being of importance. So identifying farmland or agricultural land, because that is one of the characteristics that's being most threatened with the sprawling development that Michael just spoke about. So here's the land cover monitoring system version. National land cover data is that other remote sensing data set that I was speaking to. They also isolate farmland through either calling it hay pasture land, so that, that could be animals or just for hay, or cultivated crops. So actually, getting soybeans or corns. When you put those two together, this is a very interesting map of where all agricultural land is across the region, at least as far as a satellite can view it. As far as the growth forecast land development pattern, so as Michael showed, the existing and future forecast for growth and development, this is actually looking at the parcel level information. So if there's significant development on a particular parcel, we basically highlighted it in black and out in the year 2050. So you do see a lot of development at the parcel level. So if we forecast a household or a job onto a particular parcel, it's going to highlight there. So it's probably more than what's actually happening, but what's important to notice here is that's potential for encroachment on environmental features. Looking specifically at the environmental layers, I'll shoot through these ones very quickly. National Land Cover Data Set provides impervious surface, so this is where water cannot penetrate the surface. Elevation, so anywhere from the lowest to the highest parts of our region and the impacts that might have on water flow. Steep slopes of 15% or greater. This is important for where you can build infrastructure, but also limits where growth and development is likely to go based off of local policy or even the ability to stay on the side of a slope if you're building. Tree canopy coverage, obviously important to look at where you have trees, but also the density of trees. Prime agricultural soils. This is not necessarily what is being farmed, but the lands that even can be farmed for cultivated crops. Looking at the National Hydrography data set, any of the waterways, streams, creeks, and water bodies in the region, and the associated National Wetlands Inventory that is very nearby those water bodies. Water quality assessment done by TDEC that provides the impaired streams classification. We also have a subset of this that we used in our last RTP for investigation of impacts to transportation. So we used 5 specific parameters that were identified as being transportation specific, either due to runoff or proximity to roadways. 100 and 500 year floodplains updated by FEMA. I believe the dark black circle here is HUC 8, and the smaller ones are the HUC 12 watersheds. A composite of protected lands. This is everything from public lands that can be identified through federal, state, and locally owned lands or managed lands. Also, what's included in this would be like your Land Trust of Tennessee, so your private transfer of development rights. Composite of critical endangered rare species. This comes from U.S. Fish and Wildlife and TDEC's rare and endangered species. National Register of Historic Sites. This is one where you really could assist us in adding in those locally very historic importance, even if they're not on the National Historic Registry. That's something that we're always looking to improve upon. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael to talk about our environmentally sensitive areas and how that is impacted or threatened by the growth projections.
As I'm setting the table here now for what our request is going to be of everyone. So last time we updated the plan, we used this group to help us prioritize the data that Max just went through, identify the layers that were the most critical to make sure that we were capturing in a definition of environmental sensitive area. And so these are the layers that this group recommended being the priorities for our consideration in that definition. Doesn't mean we're ignoring the other layers. It's just as we're trying to create a categorization of land as being an environmentally sensitive area, these were the preferred inputs into that definition. And then this is the spatial representation of that information. So these are all the parcels or known geographies of what we would consider an environmentally sensitive area for the purposes of our assessment of risk for the transportation plan. And so this one of the things that we'll want you to weigh in on is if you want to recommend any changes to that list of priority layers that go into this definition. Also, just eventually make sure that we're using the most recent data and that, as Max pointed out, each individual data set probably is associated with some limitation or another. That's why it's really important for us to take a look at a lot of different perspectives, sometimes on the same issue. But even when we do that, we still need quality control to happen. And so you all are experts in these areas, can help us make sure that we're just tailoring the information to our own knowledge base for the things that we're representing on maps. So this is a map. This is just a look at those areas that are environmentally sensitive. They meet one of those they have the presence of one of those layers that are in the definition for environmentally sensitive area. And then this is a map that you'll be able to explore, which is the degree of environmental sensitivity. So if a place has it's stacking all of those layers, then it's going to be more environmentally sensitive as a way to think about this. And so this is a spectrum that we apply across the landscape to represent degree of environmentally sensitive area. So what we're doing with this information, now I'm just looking at the composite ESAs. That's what I'm going to use now for environmentally sensitive areas. We want to know where those environmentally sensitive areas are, which I just showed you. And then we want to know where current and future development are going to encroach upon those areas. And that's what this map is showing you. So this is encroachment on those ESAs based on the development pattern in 2023. So green is an environmentally sensitive area. Gray is an area development, is an area that's developed that's not encroaching, and then red is the overlap. So red is the encroachment of development on environmentally sensitive areas. This is 2023, and love being the bearer of bad news. This is forecast to 2050. So a lot of red popping up on this map just because we have a lot of environmentally sensitive areas and we're a rapidly growing community. So, we're not going to be able to directly control precisely where development goes. I mean, that's the role of planning commissions and local legislative bodies to try to manage that growth in a way that is sensitive to environmental quality. And as we consult those communities, we try to make sure that they're prioritizing that consideration. But our job then is should it happen, what can we do to mitigate the conflict? This is a pretty alarming map and overwhelming. So then the next couple of maps that I have are some good work that Max and Ashley did to look at how would we prioritize this map for our focus. And so we did a quadrant analysis. And so this is showing you areas that have a high degree of environmental sensitivity and a high degree of development. So the red areas would obviously be our biggest focus areas in terms of mitigation. If we have limited resources and limited time and bandwidth, those would be the areas that we probably want to focus on the most. And then the orange are those areas of high environmental sensitivity and a lower density development, but development is still there. And low density development sometimes can be even more impactful than high density development. So, I don't want to, make that direct correlation between the level of density and its impact, because often it's the design and the implementation of the development that's going to have the bigger influence on the impact of the environment. Obviously, intensity matters, but high density development that really does a good job of mitigation is going to be less impactful than really low density development that is just cutting through the landscape in environmentally sensitive areas. And then at the bottom of the quadrants, the matrix here, you got low environmental sensitivity, low development, and so on and so forth. So it's really those oranges and those reds that help us focus in on those spots that need the most attention, whereas this map is just a bit overwhelming. All right. So our next steps, we're going to give you the tools to do this, but to the extent you have the interest and the capacity and the expertise to do so, one thing we'll want you to do is to look at our growth forecasts. It's a really good model, a lot of sophistication, but it doesn't know everything. So it might be predicting growth in areas that you already know are land banked, or there's something about that land will keep it from developing, like some topographical challenge that the model's just not picking up on. So we don't want to place growth in areas that we know aren't going to grow. So that's one thing you can look at. We also want your reaction. Like, some of this, we don't want you to be alarmed, but if you are alarmed, we want you to say that you're alarmed and why you're alarmed so that we can figure out how to manage that and potentially steer away from it. So we want you to review the forecast. We want you to review and comment on the environmental data layers, and we're going to give you the inventory of layers that you can say, there's a more recent data set, or this new data set that we came across is probably better than this one, or you can say we collect our own data that's better, higher quality, more granularity than any of these things, right? So it's just a way for you to then augment the information that we have. And then what we'll be doing as we get these applications in from local governments, TDOT, transit agencies, the improvements they want to make to the system, we'll be evaluating those projects against this information to look at how the project itself may either enable development that we don't want in that area, or the project itself may directly impact through runoff or just cutting across an environmentally sensitive area in a way that we don't like. So we'll be evaluating that, but it's going to be based on information that we need your help to put together. And then near the end of this process, once we have our vision near final for this transportation plan, there are going to continue to be conflicts. And so what can we put into that plan as far as mitigation strategies? What are the things that we can influence outside of the plan to help make sure these projects are implemented in a way that minimizes their impact? So there's several URLs. I think it's going to be easier in our recap email just to give you all those URLs to all the interactive maps and databases with some descriptions. So we will do that. But already, here's a few links that you can visit for some of the information that we've shared with you today. As far as our analysis of individual projects, we do have a software that pulls together a lot of this data onto the screen for our planners and analysts, as well as all the GIS data we have. So they often are using multiple windows. Everybody has 2 monitors here for that reason. So we're looking at a bunch of data, and then we're essentially looking at every single project, and we're trying to answer these questions. And the goal ultimately is to assess potential impact and then to offer either a revision to the scope of work for that project, a note back to the sponsor saying maybe you should consider this, or maybe you should not do this. But in the end, it's going to be ultimately their decision on whether or not they want to advance that project. It'll be our decision working through the process as to whether or not we apply federal funds. But whether or not we apply federal funds isn't going to necessarily mean that project isn't going to happen. Right? We only want to use federal funds in areas on projects that are really helping us achieve our goals. But again, there are other funding sources, and so to the extent we can just have an open conversation with our local governments about the impact, we can make sure we're covering all of our bases. So that is it. That's a lot of information. There might be parts of that you're more interested in than others, and that is perfectly fine. We'll engage with you after this meeting. Our next meeting will be May. So there'll be some homework to do before May. We'll talk about before we get out of here. But any questions about any of the information that Max presented or that I shared?
So just to clarify, if we have feedback on the data layers, you want us to like email that to you guys kind of after the fact, or there'll be a formal
Yeah.
way? Okay.
Well, any way you want in the end, because the information exchange is the most important thing. So we're going to give you tools. If you don't like those tools, just let us know. But in terms of when to do your review and when to give us your feedback, we're going to follow up this meeting with those resources for you and the questions that we need you to ask so that you can just respond to that email. You'll know. You don't have to rely on your notes from this meeting as to what your homework is.
Thank you.
Like following up on that, so you said May will be our next gathering. Will all of the environmental roundtables for the rest of this calendar year essentially be regional transportation plan focus or at least a time to, okay.
We'll have touch points on the RTP. We have a lot of work. The climate action plan is going to be another big thing for y'all. And that's due by the end of this year. I'll talk about that as we wrap up today. We have a lot of work. But the more we can keep it integrated and nested, the easier it is to do. Yes, sir.
Looks like some of the data sets are federal data sets, and they've been taking down a bunch of data sets that, especially when it comes to the environment or environmentally sensitive or things of that nature. And so I'm curious if the council is doing anything to capture data or build our own data sets that are more localized and have, can fill in the gaps.
The good news is we have captured all of the information that are in these maps. So even if they go away, we have that data now. But excuse me, now that we're on notice, we're pulling down everything we can before more stuff goes away. Hopefully that's a temporary thing. Like, it just seems like that's not for now. We should do happy hour next time. It just seems like, why would you just?
My ask would be if you have identified some that are not on the list that we send out, let us know. We'll go pull it down. Or if there's some that you can't find because it's missing, we may have archived it.
That's a better way to answer a question. I was rambling.
It's more positive, yeah.
Any other questions? Reactions? What do y'all think about the forecasts? It can't be that surprising because you know how fast we're growing. But there is some good news, though, when we look at these forecasts every 5-year interval. There's still a lot of sprawl, but local communities have done a really good job over the last few years to update comprehensive plans to rein in some of that sprawl, particularly in Williamson County. Our forecasts project much more quality than they used to. And that's a function of the land use policy. We're updating Rutherford County's comprehensive plan. We're working with Wilson County, and those are 3 really important counties to getting growth in the region right. And Rutherford and Wilson County, I mean, they're predominantly being driven right now by land conservation and making sure growth is being steered towards those urban growth boundaries where infrastructure is likely to exist, where everybody already has planned for it to go.
TDEC has an interest in Murray County too, and the Duck River watershed. And so I don't know how much you work with them on comprehensive planning or any of that.
Well, that comes up. We advise or consult, provide data to almost every comprehensive plan, whether or not we're the consultant doing the plan or not. But in Murray, we obviously engage with Mayor Mulder and his staff, but also the Murray Alliance, which is the chamber of the Economic Development Council, shared a lot of this information with them a few months ago. And that's when they raised the issue of this is a good forecast, assuming we deal with the water allocation issue, which is pretty much maxed out, right? So that's another thing that we haven't really considered historically is water allocation, because water supply hasn't really been much of an issue outside of the Robertson County, Cheatham County area. The core, yeah. But for the most part, it's been we'll figure the water out. But now it's becoming not the quality, but the supply, right? So like, the supply is becoming more of an issue in addition to the quality.
On the other end of that loop, is there like accounting for like wastewater treatment? Like I know with the residential development and like I'm not familiar with the model enough to know, but like to understand how we're treating our water before it goes back in. I know as residential, that's something that we've been looking into. Like
That's where us giving you information for you to do, like, so many people in this room are responsible for analyzing some of these impacts. And so it's another way to use us. If you're modeling out, questions like that, we could probably help you out by giving you a lot of the input data you might need to run scenarios and stuff. But we're not gonna, current practices, we don't really model out discharge and quality of that discharge back into the to the system. We do, through our watershed-based planning, we are looking at, obviously, impairment and strategies that we could deploy to try to clean things up. And we'll give you an update on that stuff here in a minute. Yeah, so reach out to us. We're a great clearinghouse of information that you can use in your own plans and your own analysis. Okay. How are we doing on time?
We have 8 minutes technically.
I think we do have, we were gonna give you some updates on the other planning activities that are happening. That'd be very brief. But we didn't want to, we're gonna save that at the very end because we wanted to give you all time to talk with each other. But Peter, you want to take over?
We're going to move into our quick, thank you, Michael and Max, for the information. We want to move into our next area, which is around the table. This is just an opportunity to share anything that you're working on, any questions that you're facing, and I'll leave it at that with our time constraints. So open the floor.
I'll share that we got $10 million almost in our recent capital budget for Metro Nashville for solar, for existing buildings, to put solar panels on them, which is historic funding for that. So there's 4 Metro departments working on doing that. And we've just put out our first request for bids for our vendors to get that solar up on 7 sites, 5 general services and 2 park sites. So really exciting. There's going to be 3 other like tranches of projects that are coming out this year. And so by this time next year, we should have lots more solar PV on our buildings. Yay! Supports our renewable portfolio standard goals and our greenhouse gas emissions goals. So post it.
Anyone else?
Well, I see that.
Too much. We're really excited that the governor for the 3rd year in a row has real conservation message in the forefront of his budget this year. And so the Duck River is a big emphasis. The pilot project that we've been working on with the different communities, pulling water from down there is moving forward. $100 million to execute a comprehensive regional water resource plan. But we also got, I think we got some more of our brownfields funding potentially too. So that's good. State parks is increasing. So I put on here flagged. I don't know if I can't quite remember where we're putting new state parks. Let's make sure they're reflected in your maps as well. And so, there's a lot of interest in conservation. This governor wants to be up in the ranks of the top conservation governors, so we're trying to just support as we can.
On the parks, though, Mayor McCall has some ideas for a park in Trousdale. Might be on your radar. If not, you can call her afterwards.
Yeah, I don't know if that was on the radar.
I guess on that note, 10 Green is super duper proud of those, 6 or 7 parks that were announced by the governor. We have our fingers in like at least 4 of them, Head of the Crow being one of the biggest ones. So we're super excited to be working towards acquisitions in all of those parks. And of course, the end of the year is always a mad dash to push projects across the finish line. So we closed a record number of conservation easements this year. Again, topped our record from last year. And the big exciting thing, of course, is our annual capital campaign, which is the hikeathon coming up in April. Registration opens March 1. So please participate. It's going to be even bigger and better this year.
Awesome. Well, speaking of fun events, we had a GNRC boat in the Dragon Boat race this year. We purposefully didn't make the finals.
The slowest paddler award. Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you have any updates for the group?
I don't have any updates on Dragon Boat. Unfortunately, I know that's what you're really excited about. But hopefully, if you're interested, that
Well, and water quality. I'm excited about that.
you're also okay. You're excited about water quality. Yeah. I mean, I think. I'm trying to think what since we've last met. I think one of the big accomplishments here in Nashville is in December we planted the 50,000th tree under the Root Nashville tree planting campaign. So that was really an exciting milestone that just started in 2018. And so we have a goal of 500,000. So 50,000 sounds like a lot, but we still have a long way to go. So I know many people have been involved in that over the years. So we're excited to continue to move forward, and we're setting records this year with trees that'll be distributed to residents and in homes across the area. So we're really excited to continue that work. And we've also been doing a lot of big, large-scale de-pave projects across the city as well. So actually going out and, finding those areas of impervious surface tucked within those parcels of that map you showed, and getting that pavement removed and replacing it with green and spongy area. So this Monday, we just broke ground at a site at the Nashville Farmers Market that we worked with Metro on. And so that one will be our newest that is getting completed. We also did one kind of in the transportation realm in an old, like a slip lane that was no longer being used. We worked with NDOT on that project to get that one replaced with a kind of a food forest area. So excited about that.
Since you mentioned the impervious surface, we are working on a project that looks at the National Land Cover Data Set and LCMS that I showed earlier. That information actually goes back to 1985. And so we're homogenizing every year from 85 to present day with our growth forecast to hopefully be able to show a 2050 equivalent of national land cover, impervious surface, tree canopy, and farmland, all of that information that would have been available in the maps that I showed. That's what we're hoping to offer in case that's helpful for any of your efforts.
But what we don't really incorporate as of yet, we could use your help with, is like figuring out, like, we just are going to assume like a certain amount of impervious surface comes with a certain type of development. And we're trying to, obviously, people in this room are trying to influence the design of development or the design of infrastructure to cut back on the impervious surface associated with things that are being built. So eventually having the ability to run scenarios for like large scale implementation of some of these design considerations and what kind of environmental benefit they would have. So we can see sometimes it's hard to convince people to change when they're not seeing the metrics year to year aren't really changing. But if we can just look at to 2050 and say, if we were to take this alternative approach to design, this is going to be the savings to the environment.
The interesting thing to consider would be like that infill development in Davidson County, because we have stronger stormwater regulations. Like that infill development can, sometimes almost improve water quality when you're implementing all of those practices versus when you have that development in those surrounding areas that don't have those stormwater regulations. So that might be an interesting to kind of highlight that even if it gets redder and denser in Davidson County, that if it's coming at a benefit to another area, that could be a strong point. And then I think also for the transportation planning, it'd be interesting to, maybe this is more at the project level, but look at like Green Street elements and how those are being factored into transportation projects when applicable, that, they can be done in a more environmentally sensitive way at the project level too. So happy to talk more about that.
Great. I appreciate everyone's comments and feedback. We're going to quickly move into the section of our agenda on upcoming activities. I'll pass things back over to Michael to walk us through a couple of things we want to make sure we take note of.
I'm going to be very quick. We are talking about RTP. I'm going to touch on climate action plan, brownfield site inventorying, disaster recovery. I'll do those three things, and I'm going to turn it over to Maddie, just give you an update on the watershed-based planning that we're doing, and our part will be done. Climate action plan. So many of you are involved in helping us get to our priority climate action plan that was published last year. It was like a quick and dirty, up against deadlines, just to make sure we had a document that qualified entities within our region for implementation grants. It was $4+ billion to invest in emissions reductions projects, but they were only eligible if they were identified as a countermeasure in our strategy or reduction measure in our priority plan. So that document was published. We applied for $500 million to upgrade the East Corridor commuter rail line with hydrogen fuel vehicles and more tracks to be able to extend that to Germantown and down Broadway. We didn't get funded, but that was kind of the regional application that we submitted. Do you remember if anything got funded through the implementation grants? Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
So anyway, so all that, right? Now we have to do a long-term comprehensive climate action plan that really is the work we should have done before. But now there's no implementation grants. So it's really just, to get people together to figure out like where we want to focus our efforts in reducing emissions from a regional perspective. And so that's about, it's due to EPA, assuming this program continues to exist. And until we get a stop work order, we're going to keep working on it. But I'll tell you, like, did you see the court order yesterday saying the administration's not complying with yeah, we know that because they're still not reimbursing us. The systems are still down.
Car's open for one day. And then
So
it's gone.
past expenses that we've already incurred are not being paid. And a lot of it is the CPRG funds and other stuff and the Inflation Reduction Act that is still being not dispersed for, it's not like grants going out the door. It's like reimbursements not happening. But we're going to keep forging ahead because there's no indication that any of these deadlines are going to shift. But there is a real possibility that some of this is repealed, rescinded. And if so, we'll find another way to get it done. I think we need a really good strategy for reducing emissions, which are also really good for us economically, both, at the household level, governmental unit level, and for businesses. And so we'll be working with you all on the development of this plan that is due in December. So that will be the subject of some of your upcoming meetings as well. We have a sector-based committee structure that we need to deploy to convene stakeholders around those sectors that we'll need your help with. Brownfield site inventories, we did receive a $220,000 grant from the BRAG program out of TDEC, Brownfield Area Redevelopment. Brownfield, the acronym is always,
The redevelopment
you're
area
like,
grant.
we want to say BRAG. What can we do to like back into that? But our role is basically to do inventories across our region. So we're doing brownfield site inventories, which will do a little bit of initial analysis of what those contaminants may be, but we're not doing like an investigation or anything like that. And then we'll pull those inventories, which will be deliverables back to those communities, but we're also wanting to build a central clearinghouse, an online portal where developers and communities can access the inventory as they're thinking about either conservation or economic development, redevelopment opportunities. So that's, we're in a desk review looking at all available data sets. Eventually we will go out to the field. Some of this information will just be like community survey, like sometimes like in rural areas, it's just going to be, somebody's grandmother who remembers there was a gas station there like 20 years ago. And then the other thing we're standing up is a disaster recovery, long-term recovery planning assistance for local communities, and ultimately a regional plan that could be a regional tool that could be used by individual communities to just self-assess their vulnerabilities to natural disasters, particularly flood risk is what we deal with here in Middle Tennessee. That's already funded through the EDA. It's a lot of just local planning assistance to governments and then grant writing for projects that could help improve their resiliency. But we're also discussing internally maybe applying for a PROTECT grant through USDOT to bring to their region. I know the state's working on some of this stuff too, so let's connect with what TDEC might have going on, but some regional modeling, like really intense modeling on assessing vulnerability of individual assets, infrastructure assets, roads, bridges, IT, communications, public facilities. Like what's the vulnerabilities there? And then what's their resiliency? What's the facilities resiliency? What's the network's resiliency if certain facilities go offline? So that's just a modeling package that we might apply for some funds to try to stand up. And I know there's a lot going on. TEMA, TDEC, TVA, ECD, TDOT. They all have some interest in doing something similar. It may be in the beginning we're all just experimenting, trying to figure it out. But eventually we need to figure out how to leverage each other's resources. That's my part. I'll turn it over to Maddie for an update on watershed-based plans.
Quick update on watershed-based plans before you all get out of here. But as you know, one of the things that we do as environmental planners, we're pretty heavy on watershed-based plans. So we recently wrapped up 3 in Dixon County: Upper Jones Creek Hug 12 watershed, the Upper Piney River Hug 12 watershed, and then the Garner Creek Hug 12 watershed. There are several up here that say in progress. 2 of those are in Davidson County. We finished our first draft of those, so they need some revision, but then those will be out of our hands, which is very exciting. We are also working on 3 in Rutherford County right now, wrapping those up. We actually did a stream walk in the Stewart's Creek Hug 12 watershed in Smyrna last Tuesday. So it's nice to get out of the office before all of the rain. We're working on 3 watershed plans there: Stewart's Creek, Upper West Fork Stones River, and Lower West Fork Stones River. And we're getting those wrapped up by March so that we can start our next round of plans in Williamson County. We'll be doing 2 watersheds in Williamson County, the Upper West Harpeth River and then Murphy's Fork. That was a special interest to TDEC and TDA because of all of the development that's happening in Williamson County, a lot of which we discussed today. So kicking that off, hopefully we'll get out into the fields pre-June, July, very high temperatures. But yeah, you will definitely be hearing more about those plans in future environmental roundtable meetings. And if anyone is interested in going out for a stream walk, feel free to give me an email because we do those. Yeah, I think those are all of the updates I have on watershed-based plan fronts. But if you would like more specific information, I've been knee-deep in them for a while. So feel free to ask questions post-meeting.
Any help that we can get prioritizing the next round too, right?
Yeah,
Location.
so yeah, we annually submit funding applications or applications for funding to get grants for watershed-based plans. So if there are watersheds or areas that you all know of or are interested in having plans developed for, please let us know, because always looking for that too.
Upcoming events, I think Vanderbilt is misspelled there, so I'll own that. But you probably have these on your calendar. If not, look into these. Tennessee Environmental Show of the South is coming up, the State of Environment Conference at Vanderbilt. And then your next meeting we have right now scheduled for May 13th. We'd like to shift that to be over lunch. Would that work better for you? I mean, we'll provide lunch. Is that worse, better? Look on your face is a little bit.
Free food.
We'll try to do something that doesn't create so much waste. But so maybe like 11:30 to 1 o'clock time frame on the 13th. We typically have these meetings, if you haven't figured out the pattern, the second Wednesday of the second month in each quarter. But our staff is out of town because of the overlap with the Environmental Show of the South. And in fact, if that is just too close to that conference that somebody you're attending to, we can look at another date. But that's what we have scheduled now. Give us feedback. We could always look at an alternate date. Peter?
All right, that brings us to the end of our calendar for other discussion. I'll pause just for a moment to see if there's anything else anyone would like to say. Scanning the room, not seeing a rush of hands raised. Our next item is adjournment. So without anyone opposing, we will adjourn our meeting and look forward to seeing you in May.